Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I repeat myself, and this is without a cocktail. Um, Good afternoon. I am convening the November 1st, 2023 meeting of ENRAC. Could we please call the roll?
Lammers, Jessica Gao, Wendy Anderson, here. Tyler Momberg,
Here.
Sarah Lee Morrissey, Bob Fitzsimmons, John Hoblick, Jack Surratt, Eli Tobias, Bliss Jameson, here. Bill Lights, Barney Lafise,
Here.
Alex Zelinsky. But we have a quorum.
Sorry, I pushed the button. It didn't work. I'll start over. Couple of brief changes to the agenda before we get to the approval of the minutes. I'm going to ask your indulgence in following up one of the follow-up items from our last meeting, which was just a very brief overview of transfer of development rights and how that was applied in the Farmington local plan, because Clay Irvin will be illuminating our understanding, and he needs to go to another meeting by 2 o'clock. And Wendy Anderson also needs to leave us at 2:15. And at the end of the meeting, Ginger has asked for a little bit of time for some housekeeping items. And before we go any further, we have a couple of award-winning people in our midst today, which I have to thank Mr. Hoblick for reminding us. Jessica Gao, Esquire, has been recognized as, I'm going to get it wrong, but one of the outstanding important women in Volusia County for this year, which we already knew. And then Mr. Lafise and his wife have received, John, you want to, because you know the title properly. All right. So with that, our first item is approval of our minutes from our October 4th meeting. Yes.
I second the motion.
Any discussion? Could you help us out with where that would be inserted? Okay.
Bob, can you use your mic?
Sam asked me
apologize.
to remind everyone to please turn their microphones on, and I failed.
And if you would just expound a little bit, and then we can.
Okay, I brought up, urban services districts, and the urban areas and how we really need to be dealing with both of those and with different levels of regulation, that we need to be encouraging development within those areas that have all of the services, fire, school, sewer, water, and by having a different level of regulatory hurdles, we can do that. So that was my statement from last time, is that we really make a concerted effort to have two-tier regulations here.
So if it pleases the committee, I could go back and listen and just find the place where that happened last time, and we can insert a sentence or two about that if you'd like.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes with the amendment of October 4th? Aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
Yeah.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Thank you. So if it's okay, Clay, would you like to speak now?
Thank you. Clay Irvin, Director of Growth and Resource Management. It was identified that there was interest in the opportunity of establishing transfer of development rights and how that could be implemented. And one of the questions was pertained to the Farmington Local Plan. The Farmington Local Plan was a large-scale planning effort initiated by the property owner, Miami Corporation. They worked with Volusia County and multiple state and federal agencies to first of all amend the comprehensive plan and then subsequently submit a master development of regional impact. Just for editorial notes, the master development regional impact is a program that the state no longer does, but the county required that that process, which is very comprehensive and inclusive of federal, state, and local authorities, that would stay with this property regardless of what happened at the state level. So from now until 2060, which is the projected build-out date for the Farmington Local Plan area, every time they go through a development, they have to go through this DRI process. And what this was, it was an effort by a landowner to address some of the smart growth issues that were cropping up in the early 2000s here in Volusia County. They acknowledged that they had extensive wetland resources. They had some very valuable natural resources in there. And they also had a lot of subdivided land that would have allowed 2.5, 5, and 10-acre ranchettes out in this area. So their effort was to try and group this development intensity that they were authorized at the right location to keep the open spaces that were necessary open. So out of about 47,000 acres that they own in Volusia County, roughly 30,000 is going to be in conservation, is already in conservation. Let me correct that. They have wetland mitigation banks that are available for both federal and state credits. They deeded over the Deep Creek area to the county for it. They've adopted a management plan for their natural resources, which is reviewed by Volusia County and other agencies. So it was a very inclusive, very open planning process that put in place this thing. The reward that they did for doing good planning was all of the development that could be encompassed over that 47,000 acres, given the land use and the potential zoning, looking at the theoretical maximums that could occur, was condensed into that roughly 15,000 acres that's left over. They're called sustainable development areas. There's two primary land uses in the Farmington Local Plan. The first is the green key. That is the area that is not to be touched. It's to be kept in its natural condition and actually properly managed so that they could restore some of the silviculture operations into a more natural operation as they proceed forward. The sustainable development areas basically range from what would be the extension of Indian River Boulevard on the west side. Some of y'all may know that as Possum Creek Road, all the way down to the county line. Part of it, they have what they call the Gateway, which is a smaller area just immediately south of the extension of Indian River Boulevard. The majority of the development straddles Maytown Osteen Road. And so in that, they took that development and came up with where these pods, for lack of a better term, could be developed. They utilized an overlay process, which showed the areas of greatest environmental sensitivity and the areas of less environmental sensitivity, soils, etc. So with this remaining 15,000, they can develop approximately 23,000 residential units and about 4.5 million square feet of non-residential. It has to be in a compact urban form. They have to utilize low impact development. They have to utilize Florida Green Building Coalition or a similar type of operation to ensure that their site development and building process is consistent with all of that. This came about because the concept of having sprawling 2, 5, 10-acre ranchettes was envisioned as the county was not necessarily healthy for that area. If we are looking for true sustainable development into the future, let's go ahead and try and protect those resources and provide that opportunity. So when you looked at the total number of residential units, when you looked at the land uses and what opportunities for commercial use could be allowed, that's how the county, working with the property owner, came up with those entitlements I just spoke about. So can that application that was done for this roughly 45,000 acre tract be carried out through 1,100 square miles of Volusia County? It was actually attempted. It was one of the things that came out of the smart growth efforts that were put forward in the early 2000s. Volusia County proposed urban growth boundaries. And the concept was these urban growth boundaries would say, here are the cities, here are their utility service areas. These are the areas that are expected to grow. Let's go ahead and try and set up a method so that someone who wants to develop in these areas that we've targeted for development has to come and talk to some of the people that we've targeted for preservation and basically buy the entitlements from them so that they could carry them over into this urban growth area. I graduated from grad school in 1989. We were talking about transfer development rights back then. There's been some success in more of the urbanized areas. When you, the big problem we realized here in Volusia County is that many of the cities already had entitlements in place that I didn't need to go out to the non-rural or non-urbanized areas to buy rights. So therefore, there wasn't a market. And at the heart of it, if you have something that you can't sell, it's not going to work. So unfortunately, our efforts at trying to establish that first idea of a transfer development rights in Volusia County did not necessarily work. And candidly, right now at this point, I don't see necessarily things have changed substantially. We still have cities that have vacant land. We still have cities that have capacity in their utilities. And we still have lands that are within those cities that have adequate entitlements through land use and zoning to not drive a market to have to go outside to acquire additional development rights. If anybody's familiar with the Midtown plan for the city of Daytona Beach, they've got entitlements that would make Midtown look like Midtown Manhattan. I mean, the floor area ratios are extreme, the densities are extreme, and it's good because it gives you a hefty amount of entitlements, but it doesn't lend itself for that transfer development rights that we were looking at. Does that mean it can't be done? I think when you look at how we do development today, specifically with some of our planned unit developments that you hear being approved in cities and in the county, it's being done on a lesser basis because in Volusia County, we do not take development rights out of wetlands. You are still given the ability to develop within a wetland per se, in that there's a density assigned to it, but that can be used elsewhere. And so what we see is when we are working with developers and coming through, we target those areas for preservation and protection. So the wetlands are there, areas where you have historic trees, if you have protected species habitat. Those are all the top three that when design professionals like Bill and Tyler go in there, they're basically bubbling out saying, don't touch this unless we actually have to. And if we actually have to, don't touch this. And then working around it and taking whatever development entitlements are there are carried over. What you typically see is the traditional zoning categories don't necessarily embrace that. And you have to go to the PUD so that you can get smaller lot sizes, so that you could potentially get taller buildings, so you can get different setbacks, so you can adjust all of that. So we are carrying over to a lesser degree with each one of our projects, a smaller version of transfer development rights, but we've not been able to get that larger conservation effort going simply because, you know, at the heart of it, there's not a market for it. That's really it in about 10, 15 minutes. If there's any questions, I'll be glad to answer.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Wendy. You didn't turn your sign.
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you. Thank you for, I want to look at you, but I want to speak in my microphone. Thank you, Clay, for walking us through that. That was very helpful. And I think it's also helpful, the very last thing you said, to talk about this, that a PUD is basically a small scale version of that process on the county level. And we've seen that over and over, right? That you can cluster within a PUD, and we've seen some great examples of that come forward at the county and the city levels over the last few years. So I would like to see more of that, and I think the work that we're doing right here is maybe helping redefine some of the ordinances that allow for that to happen on a smaller scale. And as I always like to say, I think every square mile, every square meter of our area, even the urban zones, needs to have enough green space preserved within it so that we can have our wildlife coexisting with us. So thank you.
And I do want to point out that, and thank you, I appreciate that. One of the things that came out of the smart growth discussion was also this concept of a conservation subdivision. It's on the books. It's something that right now, any property owner in Volusia County and within ECO can and is able to go forward with. It looks at conserving wetlands, maintaining open space, maintaining natural resources, and actually giving density bonuses for the amount of wetlands that you preserve, the amount that you protect, and being able to put it on just about any size lot that you can work through there. And it doesn't require a public hearing. It's a staff approval for the subdivision. And I can tell you, as someone who's been on both sides, the public hearings are where everybody gets beat up. The applicant's getting beat up because they're trying to develop in these areas. Staff is at fault because they're allowing this to go forward. And if the elected body winds up approving it, they're in trouble because now all of a sudden you've allowed development to occur that you shouldn't have. And so unfortunately, the public hearing process, when you're looking at it, can be daunting to people wanting to do the right thing. That's why there was an incentive that this is a subdivision process that's approved by the staff. And part of it is coming up with a conservation management plan, being able to make sure that there's a homeowners association who is responsible for the protection and maintenance of those areas. And it unfortunately has not been really utilized since it was adopted back in 2014. So we're going over 9 years of where it has not been fully implemented. We do have 2 pending applications for properties on this, but those are still kind of stalled, I would say, for lack of a better term. So we do have that. And again, that is something where you look at the 100 acres, how many units are available? Okay, put them here and save this, 70 acres of the 100 acres. And on these 30 acres, put your 100 units. So it is, again, a smaller scale, more miniaturized ability to use transfer development rights. And unfortunately, we've just not seen it successfully implemented at this point.
Thank you,
Anything?
Clay.
So what's the problem with those? Why does it not work? Why
My
are we?
personal opinion is if you're moving out to Pearson, you're not going to buy a 40 by 100 foot lot. You're going to buy your 5, your 10 acres, so you can go out there and have your own piece of land, your own piece of heaven here on earth and do what you want to do. So it would be appropriate on the fringe, perhaps, of cities. It may be appropriate for some places, because unfortunately, I think if you're moving out of quote unquote the cities, you want to be in a rural area. I mean, that's just my opinion. I don't know if it's valid or anything else. It's just observations.
Well, I think one limitation is that it's only permitted in eco or on property that is immediately adjacent to eco. So if it's speculation, but perhaps if it were available in any zoning category, right? So you could do that in DeLand, Tyler could have done it on his 12 lot subdivision or whatever. I don't know. But if it were available in other areas other than just eco, that's something we've explored modifying to see if it would be.
But we
more
also
supported.
currently have the cluster subdivision, which is allowed, which allows you to go down to a 45 by 100-foot lot. And we're still not seeing that necessarily being utilized as much either. Same concept, not quite as intensive in regards to the open space requirements, and not quite as intensive as, and not really any density bonuses either.
Tyler?
So I think this is something that I've learned a little bit about over the years from our clients, and they share with us certain information and keep other parts of that close to their chests. So don't know what I don't. Not sure if I don't know what I don't know on this. However, one of the things that goes into development is you have concurrency costs. So in most of our rural areas, we don't have school systems that are set up to deal with 100 houses. So if I can put 10 houses in, it's not real expensive. I don't have to have water. My fire demand for fire protection is lower. My cost of school concurrency is lower. I don't have roadway concurrency issues. Basically the cost per house becomes pretty high. And like Clay's saying, if I'm buying something in Pearson or, Barberville area or somewhere of North Volusia or down in Oak Hill area, if I want a city lot, I go to the city. I'm going to get out of my county areas, and maybe DeLeon Springs is kind of our Volusia County city of that area. But if I want to be in that rural area, it's so I can have 5 acres or 10 acres and have a horse or some cows or, whatever it is. And I think there's a lot of people in our county that's how they want to live, and I'm included in that grouping. And so, to speak for myself on this as well, I like the idea of preserving the opportunity for us to have the 2, 5, 10 acre ranchettes. And I think the land that's left available is sometimes less than ideal for that utilization in the conversations that we have in this room. But we also have people that's how they want to live in this county. And so it's kind of a question of, do we want to allow that or not? The other element of it is those development costs get high, those concurrency costs get high. If we have to put in water line extensions or a full water treatment system, I mean, we had a project in New Smyrna that required a $300,000 fire pump system, just the fire pump system, and then a couple $100,000 of lines to feed hydrants, and it was a whole mess between the utility, the inter-service boundary agreement between the county and New Smyrna, but it was Volusia County. And we were developing, and it fell under all the New Smyrna fire protection, which meant that they didn't have a low pressure truck. So develop the subdivision as you want. You're not going to get fire protection. That's the end of it, unless you come up with a solution. And so we've dealt with the problems of trying to do higher density in rural areas, and it just doesn't work from an economic standpoint, from a market reality standpoint. Even the 50-foot wide subdivision lots aren't really what people want. People want a 65, 70, 75, 80-foot lot. That's, kind of the traditional, white picket fence standard for our area. And the 50-foot lots create parking problems, and we don't really have wide enough streets in most of the communities where we have these smaller lots. And when you drive down the street, it's just not the neighborhood feel that you want to see when it's a garage, a front door, a garage, a front door. I mean, it ultimately, a lot of our clients don't even want to build that product. because they have to pay more for the entitlements, and then it's not the product that really sells, so they're aiming at a higher cost point now. And, that's just a reality of if we block to where everything is focused on a density bonus, we will get townhouses, we will get these higher density things, but they're not necessarily, I wouldn't want to live in it. And I don't know if, the others here would, or if that's the community that we want, but we're talking about the county. We have cities that already offer that.
So to wrap this up a little bit, I think the conclusion as presented by Clay for our agenda item, which was transfer of development rights, the bottom line is it doesn't seem to be something economically viable, and I'm not sure how we would interpret that into the environmental ordinances if we were to do that.
The existing regulations allow for that on-site credit that you get because of the density that's allocated to it. So you are able to utilize it elsewhere on the site. And there are methods of doing so that still have incentives to developers to do it. And perhaps we're just we're premature with our regulations for the market.
Thank you. Any further discussion of this, Jessica?
Sorry, I didn't see.
You're fine. I have 3 questions for Clay because, and I think I agree on the transfer of development rights, but I think the topics we've brought up may intertwine with the general wetland regulation discussion. 1, we use wetland density or wetland acreage for density.
You're assigned a density for areas with wetlands.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily the density of the uplands that are, so like an
Correct.
R4, the wetland density is not 4 units per acre. The wetland density is less.
And let's focus on land use. So if you have, let's talk about if you have urban low intensity land use category, that's a maximum density of up to 4 units per acre.
Mm-hmm.
However, according to the comprehensive plan, you are only given 1 unit per 25 acres or 10 acres. I can't remember the
Yeah.
density
10.
for the wetland area.
Mhm.
So we would want you to deduct it. And again, out of that magical 10 acres, let's say 1 acre is wetland, you would deduct that out in your calculation of theoretical maximum development.
So under the land development regulations, then wetlands are not included in the exemption from density from natural water bodies or water courses.
Because natural water bodies and water courses are not allocated density in the land
Okay.
development regulations. I'd have to go back and double check with the comp plan, but I believe it's wetlands, not water bodies.
Got it. Okay, that's one. Because I think I've seen that before. My other thing on the cluster subdivision, I want to confirm this is how it works. When you use the cluster subdivision, however you reduce your lot size, you then have to set it aside somewhere else on the site.
Correct,
But that can't be set aside in a wetland area,
correct.
which is maybe something we should consider. It can't be a wetland and it can't be stormwater or something like
Right.
that. So just, if we're setting aside wetlands, maybe we want to get the benefit of that. And then conservation, the density bonus applies site-wide or only on the upland acreage?
Site-wide, based on the amount of conservation and how it's being done.
Got it.
It's a graduated level based on a minimum amount of wetlands that have to be preserved with incentives as you conserve more of the wetlands on site.
And maybe you already said this, but the conservation subdivisions are only applying in the eco area
Correct. Or
Okay.
adjacent.
or adjacent? Okay. So maybe if this was something that was also something that you could do, I mean, I'm kind of conflating what's inside of a city limit, what's inside of the county, an unincorporated county. I mean, it seems like all that's left in the unincorporated county is mostly an eco. I mean,
Norma, yes, eco.
okay. So, I mean, seems like we would love to see something like a conservation subdivision within the cities. It's just that this code doesn't apply to the cities. So,
True.
Okay.
So, one of the things, if you're looking at opening up the conservation subdivision outside of just the eco, perhaps at Norma if you say all areas.
Thank you. Any other questions? Bliss.
Yes, and I was wondering, this has all led to the last answer, which incorporated Norma. So can you, explain what objective criteria was used to determine the boundaries of Norma and what year it was?
That was all part of the original comprehensive plan that was adopted in 1990, or 1990. It was initiated basically in response to the 1985 Growth Management Act. It was utilizing a couple different criteria, but primarily what was happening is you would have wetlands identified by quad maps. And thank God you brought the dang comp plan. The Norma was basically one of the overlays, but wide range of wildlife species, groundwater supply, high quality surface water, also tied to basically wetlands, habitat, those types of criteria, as well as soils. So when you start looking at land cover, location of wetlands, habitat, those types of things, that is how the Norma boundaries were drawn.
Thank you.
Sure. And eco, I know the next question is going to be what's eco? Eco is basically a subset of that that's tied to the Volusia Forever and the areas that were targeted as part of that environmental corridor that we are identified as for protection.
Thank you, everyone. If there are no more questions or comments on this topic, we can move on to low impact development discussion. Ginger has stepped away for a moment. I was going to ask her to talk just a little bit about the conference, just very quickly, because I know some of our council members attended and I know Wendy attended. Do we know if Ginger will come back soon?
She just ran to the restroom for a second.
So it was a very useful conference yet again. It was the third year that this conference has been offered by the Marine Resources Council in Rockledge. And yes, Jeff Brower attended, Jake Johansson, David Santiago was present for maybe a cumulative 15 minutes, mostly gone. Anyway, and then Ginger and I, and then also we had Doug Gibson as the mayor of Oak Hill, and Jerome, I'm blanking on his last name, I apologize, the new city manager of Oak Hill, was basically the Volusia representation. And it was a useful conference as always. This year it was really focused on kind of the design and engineering details. A lot of the presentations were either being presented by engineers or targeting engineers, going through a lot of the modeling. From the same place. The last presentation was by Amy Wicks, who was the civil engineer who designed Babcock Ranch. And she was really quite delightful. She talked a lot about the challenges from the very beginning on that project and really working with the natural lay of the land and the ecological systems on site. And then, of course, it was put to the test with Hurricane Ian this past year and held up really, really well. And so she talked a lot about, the lessons learned from that and the ways that they're trying to translate those lessons out to other communities. So that's my short version. Now that Ginger's back, I'll let you take over.
Yeah, so the conference was good, and if they have it again, I would really love to see some people there. Yeah, like I was thinking of Tyler when we were there. A lot of the things they talked a lot about the design and the modeling, and they talked a lot about maintenance too, and about how there's always that argument that we can't do LID because it's high maintenance, and comparing the maintenance of LID type stormwater infrastructure to traditional infrastructure, which of course also requires maintenance, any infrastructure that you put in. So it was a good meeting, and they've had them annually for the last few years, so hopefully that'll continue. But as far as updates on low impact development from this group and from the council, so we presented the committee's recommendations on low impact development to the council, and had a number of options, right, of how we could implement LID in the era of Senate Bill 250. And so the committee had recommended a hybrid approach where some elements of LID were required, mostly those site design elements that avoid the impact section of our framework. And then having the minimize and mitigate elements as optional, but developing incentives. And the committee had recommended that the council direct the staff to use the low impact development audit tool. So I think the discussion went really well, and of course some of you were in the room, so I'll be interested to hear your take. But the council ultimately recommended going forward with having the staff do the code audit tool, but having low impact development and then developing language to have a program of low impact development that is entirely voluntary with incentives, and to bring that back after October of next year. Well, no, actually that we don't have to bring it back. That was one of the other options. If we wanted to do something that could be considered more restrictive, then we would have to wait, but we can bring this back when it's ready. And we are working on a timeline for how long it will take to do that code audit tool. So next steps for the staff is we really are digging down into the code audit tool. We'll have a phone call with Evan Bean, who presented to you all in April or May, because he has seen this implemented and helped to implement it in several communities. We're putting together our team, and we're putting together a timeline, including when we'll go out to talk to others in the community, VCARD, the Building Industry Association, the environmental groups, et cetera. So I don't know that we're totally ready on that. Sam still got a lot of corrections on we all gave our input. So we're working on that. We're also exploring the idea of hiring an intern, at least part-time, to help us with it. It's a pretty intensive process of looking pretty much through your entire code with the experts. So our internal team will include folks from our stormwater group, from planning, from zoning, from environmental, and then tangentially some other folks, maybe the health department and legal, of course. And so we'll have a pretty robust internal team. Hopefully going to hire an intern to help us with this process. And so, of course, we'll keep this group in the loop. But we probably won't have any progress to report for, several months, because it'll be a little while before we kind of get down in the groove. And we're going to break it up into segments and kind of tackle things in bits and pieces, just for time constraints, pretty much.
I think there were 3 things that came out of that meeting that mattered. Jessica was there, Bill was there, Wendy was there, I was there. Did I miss anybody? I said you. Yeah. And night meeting. The council could not have approved our original recommendation, which was the hybrid approach, which we felt strongly about, and we made that point. They're enjoined from that by state law for the moment. So they could have said, we don't want any part of this at all, forget about it. Or they could say, we're going to make it entirely voluntary, which is the only thing they can do right now. And so they did that. So that was one thing. The second thing that was really important, I think, to this committee, really, really important, was the instruction to use the audit tool so that we could find out where we have ordinances on our books that preclude low impact development, because those would be bad things. And they said yes to that. So that was really good. And the third thing that came out of the meeting that we all wondered about was, do we continue as a committee? And we are. So that is just my short and sweet wrap up from what came out of that. Tyler.
So just to
I'm sorry, Bill, I didn't see your thingy up, but
What's that? So the code audit tool what will that do? It'll look at things that are barriers, but now that we have voluntary with incentives, will it also look at incentivizing, okay, there's a barrier here with the buffers or the setbacks. Yes, we can now put stormwater or public use inside that, but also will it look at incentives saying, oh, you can go higher or you can have less parking, things like that?
So yes and no. The audit tool itself doesn't identify incentives. What it'll do is help us identify where we have barriers, which then leads to where would we make changes to the code. What changes you make, the audit tool doesn't tell you that. And what incentives you might want to offer, the audit tool doesn't tell you that. It really is a sort of just a directed approach to looking at your code and seeing what you have now and where you might want to make edits. Not necessarily, it doesn't make any judgments about what edits are right for your community. But the reason I said yes and no is because I think that will naturally lead to some of those things, right? Like you said, well, if we find that in the parking regulations that this is a very strict regulation, well, that might be a smart place to make an incentive, but that's going to be also a task of the same committee, or not committee, the task team, because they're going to be the subject matter experts in their area, right? So we'll have the stormwater folks on this task team, and they may say this particular BMP is not something that we want to have as one of the incentives, right? So they'll be happening at sort of at the same time and in those same conversations, but the audit tool itself, it really is just looking at each bit of your code and finding those areas.
I just wanted to kind of elaborate on what Ginger was saying. Ginger and her crew are doing a great job of digging into the details. And then we were talking about the very point of incentives. And so say offering a reduction in parking to commercial retail. Anybody who's done a site plan for Lowe's knows that they want the most parking they can humanly get on their site. So offering them a reduction may not be the incentive that we feel is going to be effective. It doesn't mean that the office park or some of these other uses where a reduction in parking may be appropriate or something, but we still need to put that out there. We just got to have some realistic expectations of what those incentives will do. And that's really going to be the art behind coming up with those incentives.
One more quick thing, I apologize. Part of what's going to help us with that is the work that our grant team did, where they identified other places in the state and in the nation that have done this and have good examples. And so they presented some of that here. You remember we saw the photos of different projects around the state. And so we have all of that information as part of our grant team work product, and we'll use that. And so for instance, Titusville is one of the ones that I think we really gravitated to as a group, where they had that matrix, right? So we are not above stealing from things that work in other places. And so I think what we got from the grant will really help us in that regard.
Thank you, Jessica. And then Tyler.
It's not stealing, it's paying professional deference to those who try to.
All
For borrowing.
On the LID topic, I did want to say, one, I think that Ginger did a fantastic job. And part of the discussion by council was that, you had a council member who, I'm echoing, I feel, there you go. You had a council member who said, well, maybe we do nothing. And I think the council said, no, that's not what we want to do. But I think that council member's thought was that it's been around for so long, why isn't it happening? And as ENRAC, are we looking at ways to make it easier for these things to develop? And that was during comments. So we didn't get to say, yes, we are. Part of the big discussion this group has is maybe we should count wetlands for clusters, and maybe we should tweak this as we go through. And so I think another thing that council put forth is, one, what we already knew, which is education is a big part of why hasn't this been used if it's been around since the 80s, but also using that hybrid approach of, sure, we're tightening some things up and making things more consistent and protective, but we're also clarifying some things that are barriers right now.
And remember the manual as an output, which is a really big deal. Tyler.
So while I wasn't able to attend in person, I was watching, and I feel like I'm an expert in a lot of subject areas that I don't care to be an expert in that were on the agenda before us. But listening to the comments, one of the things that I did hear was a lot of the personality of our council members. And I love that we have a really diverse council, because when I watch these meetings, I become educated on all of these different perspectives and things that I don't know that I want to learn about every week. But with that said, I do think that we got mixed direction from the members of the council on how we move forward as a board. And I have been rolling that in my head for the past couple of weeks of how to approach it. I mean, we heard pretty strongly from Council Member Robbins that he's not going to support anything that makes it more onerous, regardless of Senate Bill 250. And I think that he had some agreement from Council Member Santiago and Council Member Kent. And it kind of became more superfluous in the comments from the other council members when I was listening. But from my perspective, I'm a little bit concerned about what our agendas are and what we're actually discussing moving forward without some clarification of direction from council on what will and won't they consider. Because what I heard from Council Member Robbins was, let's ask ENRAC to find ways to simplify the code and the process on these areas, and that's consolidation of where we have overlap. And I think to some degree, most of our conversations lead to further overlap and more code and more forks in those branches, which might be the exact opposite of what we're being asked to do. And so I definitely was happy to hear the approval of the code audit tool so that that can move forward. And I'm excited to see what the results of that are. And I think that that will give us a lot of those talking points, but I am concerned about what the will of the council is. And, I don't know, I don't have a motion right now, but I was thinking that, maybe one of the actions that should come out of today is that we ask council to give us some actual clarification of what are our boundaries? What do they want us to do? Unless I missed it.
Forgive my interjection, and I will get to you, Jack. ENRAC was created by a resolution. Help me out here, Chris. And our remit is to go through the existing environmental standards and then the ordinances that support those standards and make recommendations. To me, that's quite clear. And that was reiterated in the course of the council meeting. At least that's what I heard.
That's accurate, yes.
Jack.
Yeah, I kind of heard that, but first I want to applaud the presentation that Ginger made. I thought it was good and sound. It was thorough and right. And the comments made by Wendy and Melissa, those were great too. So, I mean, I think they were all good compliments. But myself, I was, I was a bit disappointed by some of the comments made, although not surprised. And, there was, I viewed it at a distance. Was not in the room. Maybe I got the wrong perspective, but there was a lot of questions about whether we should exist, at least with Mr. Robbins. And, and just based on the conversation I saw go around the room, I thought that had they put that to a vote, it would have been a close call. I didn't see it as a slam dunk one way or the other, but I didn't see it as a rosy perspective of what I think we're tasked to do, which is really to make the standards, the environmental standards, higher or better or confirming. And yet we were thrown into the category of the extensive regulations that are in the world of development, the number of permits that are required. And this was a conversation just about a LID. And I thought, yeah, let's talk about wetlands and let's get into some of these other discussions. So I'm not asking for proclamation on their part, because frankly, I'm not sure they have one. I think they're looking big picture. We want to be, we need less regulation. How can we cut the regulations? We should make the committee should look into that. That was said there. And I was thinking, well, kind of the opposite of what we were to be doing. So I felt like it was an interesting conversation. It did reflect the personalities involved and what their interests are. And I think we stay the course, but I think we need to recognize that when we get to the end of the road and we present what we think is proper to them, we may be greatly disappointed on what the results are.
Wendy, and then Bill, sorry.
Thank you for that perspective and summary, Jack. I guess as a person who has been promoting and studying LID for many, many years, I'm absolutely convinced that it's a comprehensive approach. And as I've said several times in this committee, I feel like everything that we've talked about so far, whether it's trees, stormwater, wetlands, fits within an LID framework, and it could be used to simplify our code. And I think it might behoove us to think about how, not just in simplifying, but in incentivizing, we can actually make this a more cost-effective, less onerous set of solutions for developers. Like, we can develop better, build better, and I guess even just the summary that Clay gave us at the beginning of TDRs and the ways that those translate down to PUDs at that scale, we have opportunities to help developers have a more cost-effective process and a more expedited process that is a win-win-win for everybody. We just have to frame it right and right, like the council was saying, not make it more complicated and convoluted. And I go back to the early months of this committee when Bob said, hey, can't we just say with trees, have this many, I don't care where you put them, and and figure it out. And I think we can continue doing our work and moving in that direction of simplifying under much more comprehensive strategies that work for everybody.
Bill. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll just read from the duties of, this is the resolution. So this duty section on duties, it says the ENRAC committee shall work with the professional staff of Volusia County in recommending minimum standards for the protection of the environment under applicable provisions of the Volusia County Charter and for making recommendations on the corresponding implementing ordinance. So I don't agree with what you just said, that it's this, that you're keeping us from making crazy recommendations. It is the job of this committee to make recommendations to the county council. Now, we're here to give you what we do now and our professional input, but the recommendations that are going forward are the recommendations of the committee, not of Ginger and the staff. And that's why we're voting, right? Because you're taking a stand as a committee, making a vote, and then I am, or whoever, could be Keith, could be Sam, could be Clay, presenting them to council on the behalf of the committee.
Which used to be done by a committee chair long ago, just an FYI. I'm going to go Jessica, then Jack, then Bob, then Tyler. But I also want to say there were two words that came out in the discussion that are different words. One is,
Crazy?
no. Thank you, Jack. That was a good, simplify. And I don't think there's a person sitting around here, happy to have a show of hands, but I think we all find the ordinances to be a morass of, I mean, none of us likes them the way they're written. The other one was deregulation. Those are two very different things. And we've been talking since day one about our frustration that if we want to talk about trees lives in a bunch of different places. Wetlands live in a bunch of different places. And we struggle with that. And I'm sure any human being struggles with that. So just, I like what Wendy said about LID as a potential to simplify, because that's probably a goal we could get behind. Sorry to get up on my soapbox, Jessica, Jack, Bob, Tyler.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to say that it is a balance. We are recommending, I agree. It's us bringing forward these recommendations, and that's part of being a committee. The council may have a 4-3 vote, but the 4 wins. That's the will of the body. And so that doesn't stop you as individuals. So we haven't had that many decisive decisions, I think, as a committee, but the tree look back provision people talk about, the 3 to 5, that was our closest vote. It's like a 5 to 4 for everybody there today. So the 4 who said no, nothing stops you from saying, the committee recommended this. As an individual, here were my concerns. You still have the ability to do that to your member who appointed you, for the council at large, as public comment and correspondence. That is still something that you can do. So I just want to say, while we are bound by what we decide as a committee in our votes, you always have the option to voice why you individually had concerns.
Yeah, I went back and looked at kind of our mission, if you will, in a general sense. And my only point was, I think that the council in total is marginally interested in our input regarding growth management, environmental resource management, and development. Okay, that's part of what we're supposed to be doing. And I'm not sure how interested they are in that, or our recommendations of minimum standards for the protection of the environment. And I think if we can do it in a fashion that's simpler and or at least appears less complex, then we'll be successful. But I think a lot of it is, as we said, it's the way it's presented, it's the way it's packaged, and it's the way it's put. Because if it looks like we're just adding layers of regulations on top, I think we'll just be unsuccessful. So that's some clarification.
Thank you, Bob.
I was looking at the original resolution, and it also said that we were to actually give the council a report on what our goals were for the year. And I was just trying to go back through the minutes and figure out, I know we had in our early sessions, but were they definitive? Did we really zero in on just what you were talking about a second ago, Melissa? I don't know. And I didn't make it all the way back through. And I think I'm just getting close to where those minutes are. But if you've got a better recollection, let me know.
I don't. I know we have to do a goal setting session. And I believe we did that last fall, but
we did, but
yeah.
That's what I wanted to go back to, because
Also,
yes, we're supposed to be making recommendations, but are we really following the goals that we set, back in March?
I think we did it
we did it before then.
Yeah.
We did it.
We did it in December.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. We had our first meeting in October, and we did the goal setting by December. So we were a very new committee, and I don't think we went very far afield, if at all, from what was in the resolution. Yeah, we did. That's right.
We adopted what those original 6 or 8
That's-
items that the
yes.
council threw at us, and we all sat and said, well, let's tackle the easiest one first.
Yeah.
Tree ordinance.
Hardest.
So that's what I remember.
That's right. And Sarah Lee chimed in with the same. Yeah. Because just going back for a second, as someone who watches too many council meetings, now it's coming back to me. The discussion of updating the environmental standards came about because we have a lot of old stuff on our books, and that was just to the council. This was the old council. And there were certain ones that were highlighted. And the old council said, well, should we bring back the Green Ribbon Committee or should we bring back ENRAC? Because ENRAC had existed forever. And the council decided that they were going to bring back ENRAC rather than Green Ribbon, and that ENRAC would do the work of looking at updating some very specific areas of the environmental standards. And at one point, it looked like the council was going to actually try to tackle that job from the dais. And it was a quite interesting meeting if you were in the room that day. It got very interesting. And that was the work of ENRAC, because if the county council were to try to tackle, as they did that day, the ordinances, I don't think that they would do better than we have. And we know what kind of time and energy we're putting into this. So, long way of saying, John and Sarah Lee have very good memories, because what came to us was the list that the council had thought of doing on their own and then said, no, we need an advisory committee to take that on. And that's what we prioritized, foolishly starting with trees. I think it was Tyler and then Jessica and then Bill. Does that sound fair?
Okay, thank you. So I think I'm struggling with how to say this because I don't want to just come across as selfish, but to the ends of the goals that's stated in the resolution, for us to successfully make recommendations, there's a lot of homework that falls to our committee outside of here. And I guess I'm trying to decide, how much time do I want to put of mine, of my employees, of other folks of our committee into doing the homework to make recommendations? Because right now we are kind of just acting almost as a rubber stamp for what the staff that have time that they're dedicating outside of the meetings, and then directing them in different directions from there. But we're not taking a driver's seat position with what we have. And I feel like I'm going to waste my effort if I try to say, hey, I think this is a good recommendation on how we rewrite and consolidate this section of code. If when it goes to council, they're going to be like, thanks, but no thanks. And so that's where, for me, it's not unclear what the resolution says, but I was appointed by a member that's not on the council anymore. And the second for my appointment isn't on the council anymore. And I didn't hear from my members on, one way or another, what they feel about our existence as a committee. So for me, I think we have to do more homework and take more of a driver's seat to be successful at our goals per the resolution. But I'm having trouble putting gas in the tank to motivate myself to put the time in if I don't think it's going to do any good. And that's what Councilmember Robbins was asking, is should we actually give them some direction so they're not wasting their time? And, I'm not sure that they would vote for this resolution as it is right now. I don't know that they wouldn't. I also know that Wendy, you made some really good, or excuse me, Dr. Anderson, you made some really good points, that there are a lot of ways that LID, as a comprehensive restructuring and through the code audit and other things that are ongoing, we can see success, but that isn't us in that active driver's seat as much. That's really us as a passenger to the code audit tool and other things. And it's putting responsibility onto staff, which is not necessarily the goal of our existence as a committee. My 2 cents.
So a long time ago, I feel like in our world, when we started trees, which was in my mind a long time ago, we took the driver's seat. We got sent the regulations. We were asked to mark it up over a month. 4 of us did it. I'm just around there. And we went through those recommendations during the meeting, and the committee decided that's too much. We don't want to do that every time. It's too much work for us. We want staff to provide their recommendations, and then we'll provide feedback from there. I don't disagree with you, Tyler, that if we have recommendations, we need to be providing them so that staff knows what our recommendations are. I think if that's what the committee wants to do, great, but we've given staff the opposite direction multiple times at this point. And so I think we need to have a discussion on that. And I want to say there's a lot of talk on we're here to make new regulations. Not necessarily true. If there's a majority will of us who say, we recommend that the wetland standards are removed from the code, staff brings that forward as ENRAC's recommendation. So we have the ability, based on our discussion and based on the majority will of the committee, to make things less restrictive, to clarify things, to make things more restrictive if they're silent. So, I mean, we're not beholden to this, we're here to make things harder argument. And I think that's part of what council didn't get, is that some of these recommendations will be more helpful to development by clarifying things that just don't work right now. And so I just want to put all that out there, where as a committee, we have a broad scope of what we've been tasked to do. And to date, we've decided to do that by reviewing staff recommendations and responding, but we can change that.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Good points. Bill.
I had forgotten that. We had asked them to, you're right.
Yeah.
So in all this, a lot of the code changing is very important. It reaches into other codes, and we have two members that haven't been here for a long time. I think we need to have a planner on the board just to help us understand. I think you're the closest we have to a planner. And Sarah Lee, so it would be nice to fill these two other spots and maybe have a planner or something.
That's a very good point. I know Councilmember Johansson is actively looking for someone, and the other council position is Mr. Brower's. Yes. So, and I don't know the status there, but that's a good observation as well. I think I said Bob then Bliss.
Thank you. I went back to the original resolution, and then I've gone through our minutes from October. And although we did discuss setting goals, I don't think we ever effectively set a simple set of principles that were going to guide us through each of these segments of the code. Okay. So
Yeah.
We did that at the December
December.
7th, 2022 meeting.
that's the one I'm looking at. Well, that was prior to December 7th, but the December 7th has a lot of discussion, but there's no clear, hey, these are our 6 principles, or these are our 5 principles, or whatever, 10. We didn't boil it down so that we're sitting down every time we have a meeting going, okay, does that suggestion really meet these 3 guiding principles that we set? Does that motion, we didn't, I don't think, now that in retrospect, and I'm as guilty as anybody, I don't think we really spent enough time focusing on the guiding principles that we would use. And then the second thing that we could go back to the county council with and go, do you guys agree with these 6 major principles? I would suggest that we go back to that point and revisit that and try to come up with some really clear guiding principles that we address every issue with.
Okay, so I'm not disagreeing or agreeing, just sort of jogging my memory as well. So originally, right, we said, okay, we need to set a guiding principles. Everybody, all the committee members, come up with your guiding principles, send them to staff, we'll compile them, we'll make a list, we'll talk about them. We did that. And we, at the December meeting, we sort of handed out the list of all the things that came back. There was quite a bit of discussion about that.
We had all ranked priorities and.
Right. And our chair at the time,
Carrie Carl.
Carrie had volunteered to kind of finagle that. We got bogged down in guiding principles, and I think it was Bernie who said, you know what, like, let's talk about what are we going to do, and we came up with the order in which we were going to tackle the topics, and this was also in December, and so we had agreed that we were going to updates and revisions to the tree preservation standards, creation of low impact development standards, and we had called that a floater, right? Because we knew that it was going to have to go with the grant cycle. And then we had wetland protection, habitat protection, Indian River Lagoon overlay, and then sea level rise and resilience. And Sarah Lee made a point about having a sense of urgency about Indian River Lagoon, and you kind of wanted to move some of those water quality issues up. And that's where we left it in December. And then in January, we started talking about trees. So
Exactly. And
Yeah.
if you read, I think those are the two group of minutes that we need to look at is the December, whatever it was, December 7th and January 4th. Because we kind of got close to that point, but we never finalized that as a committee going, these are our guiding principles. This is how we're going to approach each of these ordinances. And that's what we're going to use. So anyway, that's my suggestion would be to spend some time, maybe half of one of these meetings going back to that and try to determine, hey, do we all agree that we need to simplify the ordinances? Do we all agree that we need to come up with less pages than we started with? Do we all agree that, and on the high level, that there should be credit for mitigating wetlands?
Well, and are we willing to do the homework?
Hmm?
And are we willing to do the homework that
well,
Tyler mentioned?
But, first we got to have the principles and anyway, thank you.
Bliss, then Bernie, did you, Sarah Lee? Okay, thank you.
All right, I was there, the meeting that, they were hashing it out on the dais and they were proposing the green ribbon panel. And I remember there being an extreme amount of hostility in that room. And that was why, they backed off the green ribbon. They backed off doing it themselves. And somebody from the audience suggested ENRAC and they took it and ran with it. And it was and actually it was Glenn Storch who suggested that they go back to ENRAC so that there would be a balanced approach and there would be a group, not necessarily watchdogs, but a group that would listen to what the Green Ribbon Committee, which had been the staff.
Mm-mm.
No,
the Green Ribbon panel was much like this group where there were all types of people on it. It was just that staff had reached out to get them. They weren't appointed by council, but it was very similar in makeup in terms of the different parts of the economy and
okay. So
everybody.
anyway, that was rejected. And it was the ENRAC group, which had been successful in the past. And they were using that as a model, thinking that we would be successful. But I think they were looking to this group to listen to those green ribbon panel recommendations that had already been put forth and be the balance and, balance is the word that's missing. Be the balance and try not to duplicate. Yes, we want to streamline. Yes, we want to improve, but we didn't want to duplicate things that were already there. And that's the way I remembered it. And so, the talk of we don't need ENRAC, I remind them that, this is how we got here and this is why you appointed us. And that we are representing not just the people who appointed us, but our constituents within our districts and all those people that were outraged in that room that particular day.
Just to clarify a little bit of history, what the council was really deciding between ENRAC and Green Ribbon. ENRAC had existed for a very long time. It was done away with in, I think, the mid-aughts or thereabouts. Green Ribbon was tried shortly thereafter, made a series of recommendations, and just like can happen to us, the recommendations may or may not be acted upon. So the council made a determination that they needed a citizens group to address this and that it should be multidisciplinary. The question was, does staff appoint the people or does the council appoint? And it was the council. And it was I think there were a couple of contentious meetings, and I think I was at both of them. But it's not, as Jessica said, it's not to make more regulations. In part, it's to update. If we want to streamline, we can streamline. If we can even find where they're not streamlined, that's why I think the audit tool is very interesting. And also to update, we have more knowledge in every single way than we had the last time many of these codes were looked at. Some of that knowledge may lead us to a simplification or an ending of an ordinance. Some of that information may lead us to believe that for the good of our community now and into the future, we need to strengthen an ordinance. That's what we have to look at with an open mind and hash out, and we have to do it using base information that we abdicated in one of our early meetings when we said it's too much for us to read through everything and hash it out. We need staff to present to us what the issues are. I don't know that that means that we jump right into ordinance language. Maybe it's, what's the science input? Because a lot of this is science-based. A lot of it, the work that Tyler and Bill does, the environmental work, that's science-based. So maybe in our goal setting, we do discuss this, and I'm sorry I jumped on, but I just wanted to clarify that it wasn't that Green Ribbon served up ideas to an ENRAC. It's that they were two different committees that existed at different points in time, but for much the same purpose. Sarah Lee and Bernie.
I'm a little bothered that we're spending so much time on the past, but we did spend 2 meetings talking about guiding principles. I'm sorry that Wendy left because she was the one that wanted to draft guiding principles. And I remember that because I felt like I was ready to dive into our priorities and I didn't want to do that, and what she came back with, the group decided that our comprehensive plan was our guiding principles, and that we didn't need to be redrafting something on guiding principles. There is nothing wrong with once a year revisiting what our goals and guiding principles are. Many, many groups do that. And guess what? Today's a year.
We have to.
Okay. So it may be reasonable for a future agenda to revisit the things we already adopted. Okay. And I'm saying we did adopt some guiding principles as well as some priorities. I was away during that October 17th, I think it was. And I have not had a chance to listen to it, but what I heard from someone who did, because I was kind of waiting to see what, and I don't think they're very diverse, but I was waiting to see what the council would do. And the report back I got, and I didn't hear it, I was surprised, pleasantly so, because what I was advised was, one, there was a motion to disband ENRAC, and it did not get a second. So that said a lot to me. And then secondly, regardless of how I felt as a committee member about what I wanted with LID, the fact that they said, proceed, make it voluntary and incentivized was quite frankly more than I thought they would do. So while I can get frustrated sitting in this meeting hours on end, because we sit a lot, and we have a lot of different opinions, that ultimately is what the committee is supposed to be about. It's even though it can frustrate any one of us at any given time, it's good that we're not all agreeing on things. And I feel like, to Jessica's point, you know, the staff is doing what we have asked them to do. And if we want to get more engaged and be more directive, okay, I don't want to. I don't have that kind of time. And I feel like we're, even when we're not clear, we've given them plenty of homework. You know, they spend a lot of time revisiting issues. We have not embraced every single one of their ideas. So, you know, I feel like, honestly, it's time to move on to the next agenda item. You know, I think we're functioning. I think we're functioning the way a good committee is, you know, is supposed to work together. I think people are pretty open with each other, which is good. I think people have been respectful to each other. And not yet, yeah. And I was prepared. You know, honestly, I was prepared, and I was going to be okay with it if the council was over us. You know, so be it. I'm not interested in beating my head against the wall. And I think the amount of time that each of us as individuals put into this is up to each of us as individuals.
Thank you, Sarah Lee. Bernie, you want to wrap this?
Just real quick, I know what my mindset was last year when we were talking about this is, for me, it's hard to set up a group of core principles when we didn't really know what we were going to be talking about, because obviously we're a very diverse group. So it's kind of hard to all say, yep, we're going to agree that we don't want to increase any regulation. Well, what if 3 issues in, we find out, well, maybe there would be a place to add some regulation here or there, whether it's good for the environment or good for the landowner or good for development. Yeah, I just didn't want to paint ourselves into a corner. And that's why I wanted to just rather jump into the issues and then rely on staff, because I know me personally, I don't have the experience to know where the issues are in the code or where things need to be changed. So that's why I do appreciate hearing from staff about where they're having common problems. And I think that would be helpful. And I do think it would be helpful for us to kind of plan the year out and then, you know, obviously hope for the best and see how fast we can get through some of the rest of these issues. But I'm just glad that, you know, I guess apparently the county council is still in favor of us, because that was always my lingering issue, is after the election, are they still curious to hear from us? And it looks like they are.
Thank you. I want to say I'm very proud of this committee. Every single one of us who shows up month after month and does do homework and does openly offer opinions, and that we disagree politely. I think that's wonderful. And I think that we do have to, by law, we have to set goals again for next year. So that will be coming up, and we'll be talking in the housekeeping at the end about our upcoming meetings and agenda. So that's a definite that will happen. And I think regardless of what happens to our recommendations, personally, to me, that's not a waste of time. If I put my honest time and attention into it for the good of my community, that's all I can do. And that's all any of us can do. It's all this committee can do, is to come together and say, this is our best estimate. That next year's an election year. Some council members will be up for re-election, and the recommendations will be there, you know, for whomever chooses to act or not act on them. So I don't look at this as wasted time. I look at this as service to my community, and I'm happy to do it. Yes, it is. It is. I was going to say, it's 2:29, so the halfway point is 2:30, 10-minute break. Okay. Who are we missing? We're not missing. Everybody's here. So we accomplished the first half of our meeting, which was a review of things we'd already done. And now I would like to reconvene the second half of this meeting to continue with the wetland discussion. And of course, I didn't. Yes, sir? Sure.
So we have to come up with our new goals next year by law.
Yep.
And so are we planning on doing that in December or do that the first of the year?
Want to do that now? I
That
gonna
was part of your
reserve-
housekeeping. We were going to
Yeah.
handle that. You get a demerit for not hearing what I said at the end of the.
No,
No, it's okay.
now is as good a time as any.
It is, given how that conversation went, maybe we should decide when we want to do that. First of all, is there a statutory point at which we have to do it, Ginger?
Well, what it says in the resolution is that the committee will conduct an annual goal-setting session and outline the work plan for the year, and make an annual presentation to the county council on the accomplishment of their work plan. So I'm not convinced, Chris isn't here, I'm not convinced that the word presentation means actually like in front of the council at the dais. I think a report is sufficient. So the plan was to do that goal setting at our next meeting. I wanted to talk to you all about that. Which makes sense because it was really December last year when we kind of set the goals. With the first couple of meetings last year were really organizational and educational and those sorts of things. So I think that makes some sense. We have our meeting for December already scheduled. So I wanted to ask if you agree that we should do goal setting then. And of course, I'll want to hear from you what kind of homework you may want us to do to help with that. Also, I wanted to talk about setting meetings for next year, if this time is appropriate, if you want to meet every month. And I was also going to suggest, and maybe beg and plead if it's necessary, to potentially skip the meeting in January, just because we have a lot going on and it's a tough turnaround between the December meeting and January with the holidays. So that was sort of my list of housekeeping things.
Let's start with the goal setting portion. Pre-reading should, in theory, make us all more efficient, right? If we read things before we come in to discuss them. Based on the comments made around this table about our previous goal setting, it seems we need to make sure that we all have the documents that we used last year. And especially also if we have to produce a report on our progress. So that would be, I think the first thing we need is just a review of the documents that we utilized last year and where we netted out, since I don't know if everyone else is keeping their own file of everything. And then whether we want to try to tackle this in November. And if
We are November.
Oh, good grief, we are.
December is our next meeting.
God, that was a brutal dose of reality. Okay, so December, yes. Tyler.
So my thought on this, and I think that this is a good discussion, is we have learned a lot about what we're working with and how we're going to work through it. And so where we were last year is not where we are this year. To Bernie's point, we were not in a position that we could probably have the conversation that we can have now. And in a lot of our conversations, we hear things that have been tried. Clay this morning talked about the conservation subdivision as something that has been tried as an incentivized approach, and it hasn't worked. And I can say the reason that we have never had a conservation subdivision move forward are the burdens placed on the HOA with managing wetlands and conservation, unknown costs. This isn't something that people that are developing in rural that buy that land and develop it typically have had to deal with. And so, I recognize the county has had trouble with land management as, one of their own burdensome activities. Well, that is one of the encumbrances that prevents us from seeing success. And so a goal that I would have is, in my own dream world of list for us, is to look at what have we tried to incentivize and why hasn't the incentive succeeded? And can we prong that differently so that we take away whatever that causal factor of the failure was? Because to credit of staff, there's decades of efforts at this that have happened, whether council saw it or not. And that's, I think, some of my frustration is we've had staff doing a lot of things. We've asked for a lot of homework to be done, and a lot of time and effort has been invested. And I mean, I can do the math on my opportunity cost in the business, and it's tens of thousands of dollars a year is the difference of me showing up and me really showing up. And for me to make that type of investment, I just want to know that there's going to be a payoff, because I could invest that time in something else as community service. And I don't mean that as a negative. I just mean that as a reality of, you know, I have more demands of my time, as I expect every single person in this room does, than what I have time for. So one of my goals would be, let's see how we can make our incentives more effective, because that's what we do have as direction with the LID, with the audit tool. And it's something that maybe as the audit is being performed, if there are things that are in place that haven't been effective, if you can help us identify what are the obligations that are different for that. Because I think that's one of our big opportunities. So one of the other goals that I would have is that we evaluate things more in the context of, you know, the bigger picture. And I think the LID framework is a good place for us to start. And we start evaluating, okay, so we have this item that's going to move forward, and we work from it in a pronged fashion, you know, item by item, which is what we did last year, but we started with the staff report position. And I think that it's led to where we are to a certain extent of not having a lot of progress on items. We've had extended conversations on wetlands, on trees, but I don't think that we've really had recommendations that have been taken to council on what to do with any of that at this time. And so that would be one of my goals, is trying to find a way that we can be more effective as a committee. But I don't know how to put that into our overall goals. That's just my, you know, but I didn't mean to be negative earlier with what I was saying. It's just a reality of, I don't know where we're aimed, and so I don't know how to spend my time effectively.
Thank you. Jack?
Yeah, I hear you, but yeah, I'm not, I think the burden has to be on staff, because I'm not prepared to dig into it as deep as someone like Tyler would. But still, I hear you. But my comment was really against the presentation that is in there, that we're supposed to, in the resolution, the presentation of our accomplishments. Is that what it said? And so would that be like we should be giving them that information for this year? In other words, what we got done this year? Okay.
Yeah, the way I interpret that is that we'll set goals for the coming year, and we'll make a report to the council about
Kind of
progress on last year's goal.
Right. Okay. And that, my recommendation is that we have this presented and not just a report to the county council. The reason I say that is clearly because of this conversation last time, there's some confusion as exactly what we're to be doing. And so I think it needs to be a presentation, a very simple presentation, because otherwise I think they'll see it as just more complexity and regulatory, which we're really not. But the truth is that I think a presentation, for nothing else, to give them a foundation on what we're doing and why it's important. And perhaps it addresses, you know, the discussions we've had over the course of this year. And maybe it says what our goals for next year are. Maybe that's part of that conversation, so that they get a feeling that, okay, we're in this together. You know, they're working on our behalf to present these things. So my suggestion is not a report, but in fact, a legitimate presentation in front of the council.
Jessica?
I'm glad Jack said it, because that was going to be my suggestion in terms of the the hesitation we have about what is council doing. You know, like right now we're stuck with our job as stated and adopted. Until they change it, that's what we have. That's our task. But what we saw with Volusia Forever is that when we brought forward our annual plan, that started the discussion and action item of, are we fully supportive of this program? Do we want to continue to move forward with it? How does that look? What's the mills and all of that? And so I think presenting our goals for the year gives them the opportunity to say clearly, here's what we expect of this committee, so that we have that direction.
I would agree with that observation, having watched the the council meetings for both the Echo and Volusia Forever annual goal setting and discussion. Any other comments on that? John?
That be formally in council chambers during a meeting, or should we have a workshop with just council members as a result in this committee and council members together in a workshop?
Well, if that, all right, so let me just preface this by saying none of this is totally up to us, right? So, but whatever the committee wants to do, I'll float that up the chain of command, right? I mean, ultimately, the county manager and the county chair set the agenda for county council meetings. But if you all have a preference, one way or another, that's what I'll send up the chain and try to either get on a council agenda. I mean, getting on a council agenda is certainly easier than getting a workshop, but a workshop, I mean, they do those and they're pretty interesting and effective. So
The only reason I suggest a workshop because it's less formal and, it's cut and dry. There's opportunity for feedback back and forth without taking up other decisions that the council has to make during their meeting time. That was just a thought.
There's
Definitely as a new council, because there were only 2 members that came back from before, they definitely have been having to assimilate a lot of information in a short period of time, and that's not easy to do. And Jessica and I both just referenced goal setting presentations for some other committees, which could speak to a workshop. But it almost ends up being duplicative of the work that we do, though, also. What happened with both Echo and Volusia Forever was it took 2 bites at the apple for the committees, if I'm not mistaken, for the committees to get approval, 2 bites at the apple within council meetings, because questions were asked and answered by staff, but then there was more information that was wanted, and I'm sure that council members spoke with staff between one meeting and the next meeting, and then when it came back was, oh yeah, now we get it, go ahead. So I would love to hear from staff about what you think would be more efficient. We want effective too, like Jack said, keep it short and sweet if we do present, but what would be efficient? Because this is a messy process.
certainly the quickest thing is to get on a council agenda, make a presentation, whether that's the staff doing the presentation or the committee, probably the chair on behalf of the committee. That would be the quickest thing to do. Even saying that, though, if we have goal setting in December, we're probably not getting on an agenda until February.
Mm-hmm.
So, quick is a relative term. I don't know. I can't really answer the question of effectiveness. You all watch council meetings. I'm not making any predictions. The workshop idea is nice because it is more conversational and maybe less formal. Certainly less formal. But it takes a lot of time for the council, right? We meet once a month anyway, with whether the council is interested in having a workshop just on this. And I don't know, we can explore that.
Mr. Brower's the only one that's come, but that doesn't mean that others might want to. Jessica?
Yeah, that was along the lines of what I was thinking. Just because this meeting is already advertised as a public meeting, I don't think anything would stop us from inviting them to the first hour of our goal setting workshop, extending that invitation to say, we want to hear input from the public and the council members before we take the next 2 hours to plan our goals for the year to make sure we're not missing something. And it'd be great if you could join us. And if not, that's okay.
So you're suggesting inviting the council like to our December meeting. could do that. I mean, obviously we'd have to notice it and all those things, but. And the other way to handle that could be is for each of you to reach out to your appointer, even, or their replacement, right? Because most everybody was appointed by someone who's not here anymore.
Yeah, I've done that, and that wasn't very successful. It was well, it was just basically a oh yes, the work you do is important. It was a political answer, and I don't know that he even knew what we were doing really, and it was early on. So give him the benefit of the doubt. I think the idea of inviting him is good anyway. We should do that for specific or whatnot, but I think we still have to have a presentation to them to set the foundation. Because if in fact 2 or 3 people of the council showed up, you know, I don't think it's as impactful, and it doesn't create that foundation that I'm kind of looking for with, you know, and a workshop would do it, and maybe overkill. And you know, I'm not sure, but it may be that it's just a short presentation. And in that presentation, you invite them to join us for the first hour of whatever, whether it's goal setting or whatever it may be. And I think that would be that would work. But I think we've got to have something that gets in front of them and kind of sets the table for what we do.
Sarah Lee and then Bob.
So as a former staff person for an elected body, when our directive, whether it be in resolution form or otherwise to an advisory committee to report back to the elected body and or make a presentation, it was always the committee put forward some sort of written report. Doesn't mean it's got to be pages and pages. It could be a single page report, and it was presented at a regular school board meeting. And it was typically presented by the chair, if there was a chair of the particular committee, and or the committee selected its representatives to make that presentation. Any of them could be in the audience and, you know, stand up when the presentation happens. But it's never more than like a 5-minute kind of presentation. It's a formality. It's a way to have some accountability and transparency. I think I'm not sure I'm in favor of a joint workshop until I know what goals we might have and or if they have any goals. I certainly see absolutely nothing wrong with inviting the council to, you know, any of our meetings. And in particular, we'll be doing goal setting next month. And maybe we end up with a goal that says sometime during 2024, we'd like to meet with, maybe that's a goal, I don't know. But at this point, it seems premature to have that. And the resolution seems to speak very clearly to, you know, some sort of a presentation. And I think for the sake of the work that we do, you know, it has to be an agenda item and it should be presented by somebody on the committee. It would seem to me to be the chair and vice chair. That's what makes sense. And the rest of us could be in the audience or not, but that's what I would recommend.
Bob and Bernie.
Do you want to put that into a motion, Sarah Lee?
Sure, happy to do that. I'd like to make a motion that the presentation that is required of us by the resolution be done so at a scheduled council meeting, be presented by our chair and vice chair, and include no more than 1 to 2 pages of a written summary of our work.
Second.
Discussion?
And we add on to that, getting, trying to get on February's agenda for the council. So it kind of puts some pressure on us to get the job done.
Yeah, I was gonna suggest maybe even the January, if we know we're going into our goal setting.
We're not going to get to
No.
January.
Yeah.
Because if we meet in December and we have a whole big discussion and you're going to want us to write that all up and get it back to you to review to make sure that we've written up what you want. And if we, even if we do some of that over email, if we're maybe not going to meet in January, we're not getting to January.
Forget my amendment.
So do we have, okay, so we do not have an amended motion. Do we have any further discussion?
Just a brief reminder, oh, very loud, sorry. Just a brief reminder that the presentation given from a resolution is supposed to be about the work accomplished, not the work in the future. I mean, certainly that can be an element if you'd like to add, but it's supposed to be based on a resolution, what the accomplishment of the previous year's work has been.
We don't have to share goals and work plan. We just have to have one?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And well,
Any further discussion?
fine, that's what I was going to add.
Mhm.
So
I was going to say, since I've had to do this before I'm happy to perhaps help staff draft an initial, honestly, given the first year of our work, I don't see it more than 1 page. Okay. So I'm happy to help draft that 1-page summary of our work/accomplishments to date that the staff could then make available to all of us, right, as a committee, and then you can clean it up. It could be.
And
on
do a
the-
quickie PowerPoint, 3
it could-
slides.
It could be on the December meeting agenda.
right. So I was going to say that's something we could have ready. And if you're willing to volunteer your time, that's wonderful. But we could have that ready and send out when we send out the things for the next meeting, we'll have a draft of the the accomplishments from the past year. Not a PowerPoint, because if we're going to do a PowerPoint, we have to do that because we have a specific format and all that. But so that could be on the agenda for the December meeting and then the goal setting for the coming year.
So just to recap, our obligation, council facing, is to report on what we've done. Our obligation is also to have a work plan, but that does not have to be presented to the council for their endorsement.
Correct, but it could be. That's entirely your
Thank you.
option.
Yeah, it could be. And that was included in Sarah Lee's motion.
Okay,
which
Sarah
is
Lee, do you
on the
want,
floor.
are we going to amend that motion or are we going to leave it as it is? In which case that would be a presentation of both the goals and the accomplishments.
Oh, I call the question. Call the question.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay. All those in favor?
Wait, I
Sorry, Jack,
discussion,
sorry.
yeah. When we say that we're talking about this report, I'm thinking of 2 different things. One's a report and one's a presentation. These are 2 different pieces. One is a PowerPoint, which is a presentation going in front of council by you.
Prepared by staff, but yeah.
But prepared by staff, of which she helps with the report.
Mhm.
I'm just trying to get the clarification on what we're talking
Input is Sarah Lee,
about. Okay, all right.
helping staff.
I just wanted to make sure that there was, a PowerPoint form in front of the council. That's what I was asking. Thank you.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. Good job.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, well, I'm gonna take a second just to make sure. So we'll have a draft of our accomplishments for the prior year. We'll have time to talk about our goals for the next year. In order to do that, we'll pull together sort of the goals for the current year that we came up with last time. I'll look through the minutes to see if, you know, what the resolution was on that guiding principles. But what Sarah Lee said is how I remember it. Is there anything else that you want us to give to you to help you with the goal setting?
I think I'd just like to clarify, going back again to the genesis of this ENRAC, how it came into being. Because I think Tyler and others have kind of raised the same point. Are we going to look at specific ordinances one by one, the way we started out? Or are we going to set a broader goal, or are we going to do both things potentially? My recollection, which is what it is, was that a lot of what we were to look at, that the county council originally set about to look at, was because there was updating that was required. Some of these ordinances are 30 years old. And so that speaks to a defined set of what we look at, rather than, want me to try again to explain myself, or?
I think I hear you. So,
because if we base our work, our goal plan, our goals for this coming year on what we did for this year, it's that set of ordinances that we said we were going to look at, pretty much. So that's why I'm asking to go back there. It matters how broad we go.
So, you know, part of the reason that we've been looking at them individually is because that's how they are.
Right.
There are minimum standards for a number of things. There are Chapter 72 standards for a number of things. And so that's the framework that we operate under currently. And so that's how we've brought them forth to review. That doesn't mean they have to stay that way, but that's how we can provide that information, is how it is now. Low impact development is something of a different thing, right? Because it doesn't exist a low impact development ordinance. And so that's why we can maybe take a broader approach. And I think we've talked about using that as an umbrella to pull in some other things. And I'm not opposed to that. I want to remind everybody that the council is saying low impact development is going to be voluntary. Wetland standards can't be voluntary. So we have to look at it that way, right? So some of the things that exist now, they aren't voluntary. I guess this board could say, well, we don't want to have wetland standards anymore, or we want to change them in some way. But just using the voluntary low impact development to handle some of these other things that are minimum standards of environmental protection countywide is different than a low impact development ordinance, which is unincorporated Volusia County.
So the reason I was asking, thank you, Ginger. The reason I was asking that was in terms of what we ask you to bring back to us. And so I think you clarified, we need to be looking at the individual ordinances. Tyler and Bob.
So I think when I look at this, one of the challenges that I've had is most of what we've talked about has been, trees and wetlands, falls into avoidance and minimization. Most of what I do on a development has, avoidance and minimization is the shortest and quickest activity from a layout. Everything else from there is what you hire me for. So we have water quality, we have water quantity. So those are going to be our surface water, algal blooms, and other issues. Are flooding. Those are things that touch, I think, all of our residents, and that we have a pretty united set of agreement on. And those are not avoidance and minimization. And so I feel like we've been picking the top of the tree, and I'd like to move us to the bottom of the tree and look at ordinances in groups. So our water quality functions as a group of individual ordinances, and our water quantity or flooding prevention, it functions as a group of ordinances, and they're in different places, and some of them are minimum standards and some of them are otherwise. But I've taken some notes here that I'm going to type up and I'm going to send so that they can be shared, of how I've in my head grouped things. And what I would like us to do, if, again, if I could just be king for a day, my suggestion would be at our goal setting that we find what we have the highest agreement on in importance. Maybe we vote in a ranked voting fashion of some sort for these things. What does everybody think should be number one? And we kind of set our goals for next year to be trying to achieve the best positive impact that we can have for the community. And I honestly think that it's going to not be continuing to argue about trees and wetland standards and to focus on places that we have more universal agreement as a group. And I may be the odd man standing, we may be talking about wetlands, but it's my suggestion would be that we come up with some way that we each kind of put together what is our list of the areas that we'd like to focus in the code on. Is it conservation? Is it how we deal with stormwater?
That's how we started last year in a way. And excuse me for jumping in.
Yeah.
But that is how we started, and we started looking at different aspects of the comprehensive plan. I will say, to me, that made sense. And I think at one point I didn't quite ask the question, but I wanted to, which was, okay, can we say who likes trees and who actually would like to do away with trees? Because that mattered. That mattered in a tree discussion, right? I'm forcing it to a silly extreme.
Well,
but
in that extreme, I don't necessarily value an existing tree the same that the rest of the group here does. I value that there's a tree there. I know that we saved a tree in the middle of 1792 down on the south end of town. It's dead. They got struck by lightning. It wasn't because it wasn't successfully saved. We see trees that get saved, get blown over. I recognize that these things aren't permanent, and I see that as we need to focus in the other areas more. But that's me personally being in dissonance, I think, from the majority opinion present. But that is your point, I think, is that we do have those dissonant opinions.
And that's fine. So, but as a practical, I want to hear from other people on this as well. From a practical standpoint, grouping all the different aspects of water, say, together that are within the environmental standards.
Yes, that little caveat is important. It's looking at the county environmental minimum standards and the implementing ordinances that implement them. So not everything is in the environmental minimum standards. You could make a recommendation that you want a new minimum standard that is water quality or something else, but
I guess
we're going to bring up, here's the council work program.
Thank you.
That's what went to the council the day that they,
yes,
when they initially said, okay, we need a committee to look at these things. And
that's so small. Could thank you. Yeah.
So, excuse me. One of the things was standards related to adaptation of sea level rise and looking at the Indian River Lagoon overlay. Those are topics that were on that list. And we don't have specific storm or like water quality regulations because that's the state, and hopefully the water quality rule, the new stormwater rule, will address that. But like, we don't have water quality regulations in our stormwater code. That's something you could recommend, but that's not.
I mean, in ways we do. We do have stormwater code that is overlapping with stormwater code at the state level that is in place to address water quality and water quantity. And so in a closed basin, typically today, you could argue that we do have a water quality criteria that has to be met. That's kind of what I'm looking at is in the audit tool. I mean, I really am hopeful because I think this will be an educational experience for those who aren't as familiar with all of the nuances of the code. But I think the audit tool needs to identify that, hey, if you have to have a dry pond because you're in a closed basin and you're having to infiltrate that water into the ground, the differential volume of your pre-post development, this is the storm event that you have to do that on. It's not all storm events. We could expand that and we could look at more events. That's a flooding thing, but that's not necessarily getting into the nutrient discharge area because it's our daily rainstorm events. I think some of it needs to be, here's how the code interacts and the educational format that you guys have done an excellent job the past few meetings of, but.
Yeah, I think and Jessica, I'm going to get to you in a second, and Bill, but this and the work that we've been trying to do in many ways is an iterative process because we're looking at the codes that we have and the ordinances that we have, and that is the task that was outlined regardless of who did it. Tyler, what you're proposing is a very holistic view, very in another way goal directed. And it may be a very good thing to do, but I'm not certain that it's doable by this committee because of the interrelated nature of the ordinances. I see value in it, potentially. And Jessica, you deal with this stuff day in and day out. So I'm punting to you on comment on that because I see why you're.
Well, to just before Jessica jumps in, the point of clarification I would make is not just take a holistic look at every item, but kind of take a holistic look of what area are we going to have the best results working with. So we have 500 suggested code edits right now. And if we take them line by line from top to bottom and argue them, we haven't prioritized them first. And so I'm suggesting if we prioritize them first, our time may go further. We may maybe have more than a half a page to put in our summary next year, and we can maybe make it 2.5 pages. You know, and I'm not saying that, I'm just recognizing that also we're here as ENRAC, the Environmental and Natural Resources Advisory Committee. So I don't want to just throw out the natural resources and environmental standards, but what part of it is drove our existence. I heard a lot about Indian River Lagoon. I heard a lot about surface water quality issues, which are runoff. Those are directly stormwater runoff. And so for me, I want to make sure that we have an opportunity on an annual basis to make sure that we focus what our agendas for the coming year are with a higher altitude perspective.
So I think we're having an identity crisis, which is fine overall. And that's, I originally raised my card to say, yeah, we have 40 minutes, let's go back to wetlands. But I think this is more valuable because if we're changing the structure of how we approach things, maybe continuing down the thing that we may want to shift isn't the best use of our time today. And so I think that, like I said, as a committee, we have broad discretion to decide how we want to approach these. I think that there are so many pieces of the code that interconnect and intertwine that that's never an easy discussion. Clay taught me something about density today. And so, and I've been doing this for 5 years. And exactly, you're like, wait, that's how that code works? And we do it every day. And so I think that we've always talked about the ripple effect of we're going to see something in trees that then we want to put into this and we want to put into this. And I think the last time we had this discussion, it was, well, we need to see those things first to then know where they're going to ripple. But if you guys remember the very beginning, before we started looking at trees, we did a 500-foot view on the categories of minimum standards. And then we tried to kind of rank our priority from there. And maybe that's what we revisit next time. In the overall category of things, what do we know we want to do? There's still a new habitat code to draft if we're going on the council work plan. That hopefully is last, honestly, guys. Or at least we just put a section into each other one that we look at. And so are there different ways to look at it? Absolutely. I'm open to grouping and saying these things connect from a application standpoint really well, stormwater and wetlands. And I think that has been the key that we've heard is water quality from Chair Brower, flooding, of course, and, you know, wetland regulations and how that ties into low impact development, water. Exactly. That's stormwater volume. Yeah.
We did when we just, Bill, I'm gonna get to, when we just started talking about the goal setting, I still have from between our first meeting and our second, when we all had to write in based on the comp plan, what the goals and objectives were and our comments on them. I have that document and I actually consolidated everyone's responses and tried to harmonize them to understand what what the group was interested in. So we did go through this process. I have my marked up document. I have to find what the title was of the original one. That might be helpful for us to review again before the next meeting. Bill?
I would just say, I do agree with Tyler. If we can look at kind of the bigger picture and get the biggest bang for our buck, instead of looking at one word changes on the ordinances, I think it'd be good. And I think that's one reason why we need to have somebody like a planner to come in so that they can understand those, how it reaches the ripple effect. So I would support that.
Does someone want to make a motion? Or Keith?
I just wanted to jump in here. I haven't heard anything about this, but one of the reasons why this group was brought into action is because the public showed up in mass
Yes.
to the county council, and they were upset about mass clearing.
Yeah.
They were very upset about the removal of trees. And that's one of the reasons why we kind of started with the tree ordinance first. We had it ready to tee up, but I haven't heard anybody mention that. And I just wanted to bring that back into the attention.
That's very true. John?
Yeah, I think, and I'm just thinking broad picture here, it would be helpful. I mean, we originally had the 6 goals in which the council wanted us to address. But they haven't addressed them in the first year. And here we are, we're doing, a lot of these motions or what have you to go through with trying to understand LID, try to understand tree ordinances, but then, it's not on the council's agenda. And so is our work in vain is my question. And if not, then maybe we should try to supersede what the council wants from us. And it's a new council and they haven't really had a lot of clarity, but maybe we should be looking at what the council wants us to explore before they go into 3 months down the road or 4 months down the road to bring an issue to date. And then we can be more effective and say, we've reviewed this, we've discussed it as a committee, and here are our recommendations. Tree ordinance was a big one, but it kind of went away with the new council.
I don't think it went away with the people, though.
It didn't, but
I'll just say, I don't know that we have definitely we have a different council, but the council hasn't talked about it because they've given it to you to talk about, and they're not going to talk about it again until you come back to them with recommendations. Now, whether or not this council cares the way the last council cares, that's anybody's guess, but they're not agendaing anything until we have something to talk to them about.
so then maybe we should be wrapping up what they originally told us to do and get it to them. We kind of put the tree ordinance on the shelf, and that's what, like Keith said, brought everything to a head in this committee's formation. So, I wouldn't invent a whole nother bucket of ideas if that's not what the council wants. Just a thought.
Thank you. Jessica?
Yeah, so on that, I think the purpose is, one, I think we finished trees. We've got, and we didn't finish, but we have recommendations, but that we can't move forward until November of next year. And so in my mind, the pause is part of taking that comprehensive look, that when we get through wetlands and we look at LID and we look at habitat, there may be things we want to tweak in trees. And so, when we as a committee decide to staff, hey, we think that our tree suggestions are pretty much baked, can we move it forward to council? We could do that piece by piece. I think we just want to see kind of how those fit together. And I agree 100%. I think the pool is still the pool. The work plan is still, these are the pieces. I think what we've heard today is maybe how do we group them or tweak them on how we bring them forward, not creating new ones, I hope.
Thank you. And I just want to say I prepared for a wetland discussion today, not for a goal setting discussion. I just want to be real clear about that. Spent 4 hours this morning preparing. That's not complaining. It's just I didn't go to the old documents. I looked at what was on the agenda for today. My bad, Tyler.
And I think, Keith, you bring up a good point. I've heard a lot of perspectives from the public on the mass clearing concerns. And I think when we had the conversations previously, one of the things that we have in code is that construction has to be phased. But then because of all the mass grading requirements, which gets into our stormwater code causes that, and our utility code causes that, and everything, like, once we got into the full envelope of it, it was kind of the public has a problem with how development is regulated at this point. And the regulations are all things that we're asked for. And so this is an unintended consequence that we don't build one house at a time. I think the idea that we attack that through preserving more trees or through more onerous tree code or whatever, we kind of as a group beat dead that wasn't going to accomplish the goal that the public had. And the maybe looking at better opportunities to overcome that obstacle to the phasing back to, I think that if we work on our obstacle efforts, that's where we're going to see more energy usefully move forward.
Thank you, Tyler. Beth? Yeah, well, no, I've been interjecting a lot, but let's be practical. Jessica says the work plan is the work plan. Tyler says, let's group. We all know more than we knew a year ago, don't we? I think we do, and a lot more. That's what we've done to you, huh, Ginger? I know I'm more confused, but I think I'm just reiterating what Jessica said. Let's take that work plan and let's do our own little groupings and comments on it again, each of us, sooner rather than later. Try to share it well before the December meeting. And you know, I see this as relating to this. That may be something that environmental permitting, environmental consulting, I'm sorry, would take a special focus on. Bliss may see other things interrelated. I'm kind of the advocate person here, but then try to turn that into a set of goals, but a fresh look at it, not with the idea of just coming through an ordinance. Bliss. I forgot about it.
Yes.
We voted on that one on the yeah.
See?
That's why we're having. See, we're setting our goals for setting our goals. We agreed when how we do it, and then we're having the, yeah.
Okay. I'll write that down.
So would Jessica like to make a motion? Oh, no, we're done now. Okay. All right, so.
Okay, I will get out to you what we did last time. You guys can look at that, send us back comments before the meeting if you'd like. And if we get comments back, we'll collect them and shoot them back out to everybody. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. In a half hour? No, I think we're going to Persimmon Hollow. Only we can't do that.
Well, if we're not going to move on to wetlands, I do have one other thing.
We have had, yeah.
Okay. I don't know, probably some of you heard that Mr. Robbins brought up at a recent council meeting the gopher tortoise protection ordinance, and he was concerned that our ordinance was more restrictive than the state rules that protect gopher tortoises, and he wants a presentation to council about potentially streamlining our code. He was concerned about the fee that we charge people to do that gopher tortoise review. So it was going to be scheduled for November 21st, a presentation about the gopher tortoise protection ordinance, the fees, the data, how many we've done, that sort of thing. It's now been pushed to December 7th. Is it the 7th? The December meeting. What is that? December. Just the December, yeah, yes. that makes sense, December 5th. So far, what I think, my expectation is that staff has created a presentation that just goes through the Gopher Tortoise ordinance, how it relates to the state code, which basically all our ordinance does is say that we have to look at a site before you do site development work. If you're in an area that has been determined to be likely Gopher Tortoise habitat, we do those inspections. If you have gopher tortoises on the site that can't be avoided, we send you off to the state for permitting. If you don't have gopher tortoise site on the site, we sign it off. We do charge a fee for that in some cases, but not in all cases. If we're already on your site for some reason, like you have a wetland alteration permit or you have a tree permit, we do that gopher tortoise inspection for no additional review fee. If we have to go to the site specifically for the gopher tortoise inspection, we do charge $100 fee. And if clearing happens on a site prior to that gopher tortoise inspection happening, there is a $499 after the fact permitting fee. So basically our presentation goes through the ordinance, explains that it's not more strict than the state rule. It's really just making sure that people that need to go through the state process get through the state process before they do bad things to gopher tortoise burrows. And, you know, we really feel like that helps homeowners, developers, whatever, keeps them out of compliance issues with the state, which are very, very costly and that sort of thing. So we have a presentation ready to go, which now looks like it's going the 5th.
Yeah, our conversations with FWC is that Volusia County has a much lower rate of disturbed site permits than other counties who don't. So, you know, we get out there, you know, look at it. We're clearing these lots. We're saying, you know, you can move forward with your building permit or your tree removal permit. And then the neighbor calls in, they call FWC and they say, hey, there were gopher tortoises on that lot. Go get my neighbor. And the FWC officer contacts us. We say, no, we did the inspection. There were no gopher tortoises on that lot. They're good to go. You know, or there were, and then they had to protect a portion of the lot. And then, so we work a lot of those issues out for people before they ever get into trouble.
It's
Yeah.
really important, I think, too, to understand how we got to our arrangement that we have today, because it matters a lot. In 2006, when the gopher tortoise protections were uplisted, when the gopher tortoise was placed on the protection list, Volusia County was asked to work with FWC, Volusia County, to come up with a model ordinance. And so the ordinance that we have was developed over a long period, a 4-year period, with the developer community, with the Home Builders Association, with VCARD, with environmental groups, a very broad base of constituents. And it's been seen as something that has been helpful to the development community, not burdensome to it, is the feedback that we've heard, because you're not getting slammed with fines. It's a fine avoidance, right? So it's always good to ask, why does this exist? What's the reason behind it? Jessica?
In my experience, other than paying to relocate the gophers, if there are many of them, and the timing of that, gopher tortoises the county process for gopher tortoises provide information, but doesn't necessarily burden development, right? It provides information, but it's not costly, it's not time intensive. Just, you are more boots on the ground in that aspect, so I'm gonna get your.
Yeah, it definitely streamlines the process, and all it really does is lets a person know that they need to go get a consultant to relocate tortoises. Other counties and cities don't do that, so it's just up to the contractor or whoever to say, yeah, you need to look for tortoises. One thing, you know, I have seen in some PUD documents saying you need to avoid and redesign for gopher tortoises, and that's not appropriate, I don't think, under your ordinance. So I would avoid putting that in there. But otherwise, yeah, it's a good program. And, we would charge $500 to go out and look for a site, do a survey on a site, and they're doing it for either free or $100.
So I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention because I didn't want you to hear about it and, we didn't, it's not on our list really to talk about in our work plan, but it is, relevant to the work of this committee. So if you're interested and you want to attend the meeting or, whatever.
I would suggest, since you wouldn't call on me, I'll just jump in there. I would suggest that you include the other counties which have more onerous impact, because that seems to be something Mr. Robbins is very interested in, what other counties do. And when you show that, in fact, these other counties have more difficult ordinances, that may make him feel better.
Well, I think
The model.
what other counties have is more non-compliance with FWC, right? So if you don't take care of your tortoises beforehand and you get into a compliance issue with FWC, it's up to $10,000 per borough that you get fined. So what FWC has told Keith is that our county has by far the lowest rate. I shouldn't say by far. Our county has a lower rate of these compliance type permits than other counties because we're out there helping people stay in compliance.
Yeah, I just mean, there should be a comparable. He clearly likes to identify that.
I mean, just to add to what Bill was saying, it's difficult for us sometimes to deal with the volume of requests that happen for, hey, can you go look at this thing on this 1 week schedule or whatever? And so we do sometimes charge more money than that review might be worth. And I don't do these, so I'm speaking badly about others, but ultimately it's not a high effort thing to go walk a site and look for the signs of a gopher tortoise, but it is sometimes hard for a homeowner or somebody else to get the biologist to actually get out there. So this is a good public service that's available from the county, and it's being set up as a requirement. But, this is one of those things that the environmental staff do really well that make it nicer to build in Volusia County on a building level. I mean, I'm not always just negative on you guys. This is something you do.
Say that out loud on December 5th.
It's a great example of balance, of caring about a keystone species and of caring about how land gets developed also. So
I frequently tell people that I don't have time for whatever it is they're calling asking for help with. So I don't know how many others are doing that, but this is where there being a government service for it is nice.
Just some numbers for reference. So last fiscal year, we did 2,666 gopher tortoise inspections. Only 1,200 of those, 1,207 got a review fee. There were only 82 interim inspections and only 8 late fees total in the entire year.
wow.
82 interim inspections. That means we had to come back out to look for a silt fence, gopher tortoise protection. So that means, that they could save the gopher tortoise, or they could leave it there. They put in their barrier and we'd come back out. So eight total late fees. That's not a lot.
And what is the late fee for?
So that would be like if we come out there and there are gopher tortoises in the area, they've cleared the lot. It's pre-cleared, pre-filled, and there were no inspections. They didn't contact a consultant. If they can contact a consultant and the consultant cleared it, then there wouldn't be a late fee because they already had that cleared. But basically that's it.
And that's the $499.
Yeah. Well, last year it was 484, but it's 499.
Inflation.
Full-time or part-time?
Well, our total division or environmental permitting, yeah.
We've got one part-time staff and one part-time contract staff, one full-time contract staff, and then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 now full-time environmental specialists that are in the field. So 6 field people that do inspections for permits. And we have 2 compliance staff and then Todd and myself. That's for all permits. That's for trees, wetlands, yes. Class 2, gopher tortoises, yes. That's, yeah. And almost, well, it wasn't 20,000. It was like 19,800 and.
Well, it's reviews. It's reviews.
Yeah. 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 Well, like if you have, well, if you have a gopher tortoise inspection and a tree inspection on the same property, we get 2 for that. So, yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah. Yeah, that would be very rare to have all 3 on one lot.
All right.
Yeah.
It's 3:45. I don't think we're going to have a wetland discussion today.
So we're gonna have goal setting and wetlands next time, yes? I think we can try to do both things. Oh, wait, we never really did decide about meetings. Are we gonna keep this meeting time? Are we gonna try to keep monthly meetings and are we gonna skip January?
If we are skipping January, anybody want a different meeting schedule, or is this already, I have it in my calendar in perpetuity.
Okay, so we'll calendar next year, monthly meetings minus January.
And so the,
Oh, it's okay.
if we're gonna skip January, you will send out after our December meeting, our final report before it goes to council for
Yes, if
comments.
that's okay with everybody, we can handle that through email. Obviously, you can't email each other, but you can all email us. Yep. Yeah.
Well, sometimes you don't even come.
What is the current proposed date for January?
Okay.
Third? Second or third? Well.
We did a meeting.
Yeah.
We did that in July, and then we had to come back 2 weeks later for a meeting, and that was not.
I think that if we don't get through everything in our aspirational list of goals for next month, that we could potentially have conversation in January that doesn't require a lot of preparation, if that was what the concern is. But I think that it may be a bad idea to ask for a lot of preparation and a lot of review efforts on our part during that end of December period. And so if we're opening new doors, I don't think we should have the January meeting. If we're just closing out conversations, goal setting, wetlands, whatever is on our agendas right now, I wouldn't be opposed to it. So could we wait till next meeting to decide, or do we need to? Okay, that would be
I
my
think
vote.
those are excellent criteria. All right.
One more comment to that. So let's just say we do get in a slight snafu after the December before February, we can meet teleconference. Nope. Even if it's public noticed.
You have to have a physical quorum. Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll keep the January meeting on the books. We'll make a decision in December. If we're good in December, cool. If not,
We will not ask staff for anything for January.
Yeah.
If we do a January, just so we're clear. Yes, Bill.
A new member or 2. Who does that?
One is already underway. Mr. Johansson's person, he is actively looking.
And it'll have to go to council. So it'll be an agenda item at council where he can pick his person, but he's looking for somebody. The other is not really a vacancy until I can confirm that Eli is just not coming. But he hasn't been here in 6 or 7 or something meetings. So I'm working on trying to get in touch with him.
So do we talk to him or do we ask Mr. Brower to ask him? No.
Well, I'm gonna try first and then, but I have let Mr. Brower know
Okay.
already, so.
'Cause it
We have to officially have him not on the committee before Mr. Brower tries to recruit someone.
Is that us?
No,
or-
you don't have to do anything.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll handle that with Mr. Brower.
We didn't. We didn't. We didn't set at the beginning what and we didn't do it deliberately because stuff happens. We talked about missed 2 meetings, you're out, and then people ask to be forgiven. And so Ginger, you'll talk to
It
Mr.
says that
Tobias.
committee members serve at the pleasure of the council and may be removed without cause by a majority vote of the council. That's the only
That
way
would be
they'll
me.
be removed, short of, resigning.
So we don't have to vote on this? Nobody else has their little name thing up, right? No? Okay, we are adjourned.